So we are discussing about the economic system. Let's continue from there. Then, as I've said, this economic system is categorized based on resource allocation and resource ownership. And the resource could be owned by resource. We mean it could be companies, it could be private. I mean, it could be the rail transportation. Okay, so resources of the state. Okay, if they are owned by the state or the government, then we say that is a state ownership. And private can also own resources. Okay, and the other is resource allocation. Who is allocating resources? Resource allocation, in a sense, as I've said, for example, in market economy, the demand and supply of a product is determined by the customer, okay? Because we produce products for the customers. So we know how many of these products are demanded by the customer based on customers' needs, right? And we supply this products to our customers. But resource could also be allocated by the state, or which is called common resource allocation. So it means that whatever the demand is, there will be some amount of products which will be allocated for the public by the state or by the government. Okay? So it's not when resources allocated by the state or the command, then there is no such thing as a demand and supply graph. Okay? Because they always demand will be higher than supply, because the government is trying to control the resources. Okay, so anyways, for example, here, when the resource is owned by private and allocated by the market, then we say there is, or the economic system of the country is market capitalism. Okay, and when resource is owned by privates, but it is allocated by the state, then it is called centrally planned capitalism. Okay? So this is a kind of controlling the price and wages. Okay? So that is, resource is owned by the private, but it is allocated by the state or by command. Okay? So that is centrally planned capitalism. And the other is resource ownership could be by the state. So the state owns the resources, but the market allocates these resources. Then we say there is a market socialism. And this is mostly dominated by monopolies from the government. Okay? And the other variety is when resource is owned by the state, and it is allocated by the state. Then that is called centrally planned socialism. Okay? So the thing is, this market capitalism and centrally planned socialism, they never existed. Okay? They have never existed in their pure form. So there is no country in the world which in its purest form exercises market capitalism. And there is no country in the world with its purest form exercises centrally planned socialism. Okay? Even China is not a centrally planned socialist country. Okay? So these two are extremes, and there is no country that exercises these two in its purest form. Okay? So now we'll talk about each one of these economic systems. But when we talk about these economic systems, we will categorize countries under these economic systems. But it doesn't mean that this country exercise these economic systems to its fullest or to its purest form. Okay, so let's talk about, for example, market capitalism. So I want you to also think about which categories Korea will be identified as. Okay, so is Korea's economic system market capitalism, or centrally planned capitalism, or market socialism, or centrally planned socialism? So I want you to identify which economic system Korea is exercising. Okay, then I will talk about that at the end of this topic. Okay, so let's talk about market capitalism. For example, North America, countries in the North America and most of the European Union are categorized as an economic system called market capitalism. Okay, North America and the European Union. So in this market capitalism, individuals and firms allocate resources. Okay, so as we have said, resource is allocated by privates, right? Production resources are privately owned, and the production capacity of the firms is driven by what customers need. Okay, so the customer determines the demand and supply of this production. Okay, and the other characteristics is government's role is to promote competition among firms and ensure protection for the customer. Okay, so there is no government role in the market capitalism. Okay, so what I mean is, in market capitalism, the government cannot fix prices and the government cannot control the individual firms. Okay, so the assumption is consumers demand for a product will determine how much a company will produce, and because of competition, the price will be fixed by the customers playing role in the economy. Okay, so which means, since there is a high competition, a firm cannot just increase price because there are other competitors that are willing to sell their products at lower price. Okay, so because of the competition among the firms, the price will be fixed on the stage where it is comfortable for the customers to pay. Okay, so that is called the break-even point price, will be fixed by the market. Okay, so not even the firms determine the price of the product. Okay, the price of a product is determined by the market itself. Okay, because it's a market economy. Okay, so the government's role here is to identify policies to promote a healthy competition among the firms in the market. Okay, so the government is just there to play the role of promoting competition, laying out policies, controlling this, whether these policies are implemented by the firms or not. Okay, so the government will not take part in the market. Okay, so as we have said, the purest form of market capitalism does not exist. Even the US, which is referred as the market economy country, interferes in the market. Okay, so there is no pure form of market capitalism exercised by countries. Okay, so if there is no pure market capitalism, what are the varieties? Okay, so we have, for example, Anglo-Saxon model of market capitalism, we have social market economy model, and we have Nordic model. So these are the three different models in market capitalism. Okay, so for example, United States, Canada, and Great Britain, they exercise the Anglo-Saxon model of market capitalism. And Germany, France, and Italy, they exercise the social market economy model. And Sweden and Norway, Nordic model of market capitalism. Okay, so if you see the key characteristics, they a little bit deviate from the true form of market capitalism. Okay, so for example here, the true characteristic, I mean the key characteristics of Anglo-Saxon model says that there is a private ownership. Okay, that's good, because market capitalism also says there is a private ownership of resources, right? And the other is free enterprise economy. That is also good. Capitalism, good. Minimal social safety nets. Okay, this is where the problem comes. Highly flexible employment policy, that is good, but employment policy is up to the firms. Okay, so the country is involved in some social welfares, okay, or social safety net. So if you are involved in social safety net, that is a characteristics of partly a socialist economy. Okay, so that is the key characteristics that deviates from the private ownership. Okay, so the other is social market economy model, the other variety of market capitalism. So you can see the key characteristics. It says private ownership, good. Social partners, that's not purely capitalist. Okay, there is a social partners orientation that includes employer groups, unions, and banks. Okay, unions and corporations are involved in the government, and vice versa. And there is inflexible employment policies. So if there are inflexible employment policies, then that is not in its purest form with the market capitalism. Okay. And the third one is the Nordic model. So the Nordic model is a mix of state ownership and private ownership. Okay, so here, basically, in market capitalism, ownership is private, right? But here in the Nordic model, it's a mix of state ownership and private ownership. Okay, so there are high taxes, there are some market regulations, and there are generous social safety nets, which is more of a socialist structure economy. Okay, so anyways, since there is no purest form of market capitalism, the Western market system has different varieties, which mostly employs characteristics of market capitalism, but lacks in its purest form. So because they also use the socialist view of the economic system. Okay. And again, let's talk about the other variety that is called centrally planned socialism. So this is the other category of economic system. Okay, so as we've said, there is no pure form of centrally planned socialism, as there is no market capitalism in its purest form. Okay, so that is opposite of capitalism or market capitalism. Okay, because in a centrally planned socialism, resource is owned by the state and it is also allocated by the state. So that is the opposite of market capitalism, where resource is owned by private and allocated by the market. Okay, so state holds broad powers to serve the public interest, decides what goods and services are produced, within what quantities. So what type of products will be produced, will be decided by the state. And the quantities, how many of these products will be produced, is also be the decision of the state. Okay, consumers can spend only what is available. Consumers cannot will not buy everything they want. They can only buy what is provided by the state. Okay, so I don't know if you remember, there are unions. Okay, back in the days in the socialist, when most of the countries are socialist, so there are so many unions. Also, families used to go to these unions to buy some products, for example, sugar, it could be bread. So it is like a ration to the public, and you go and buy your quota. So quota is assigned per family. For example, if it is a family of 4 people, then there is assigned quota for four people family. So you go and pick your quota. Okay, you cannot buy above, you cannot buy below, because that is the quantity that is decided by the government. Okay, so it used to be like that. It's not like this anymore. And government owns entire industries and controls distribution. So the entire production is owned by the government. Okay, so the government can price whatever price they would like to have from the products. Okay, demand typically exceeds supply because the government is in no competition with nobody else. They produce and they sell what is determined by the state. Okay, so always there is a demand, but it is limited by the government. Okay, so there is little reliance on product differentiation, advertising, pricing strategy. So you don't expect product differentiation. Okay, because why would the government offer different products? Okay, because the government has the market already, and they produce, they sell. Okay, companies, farmers, they produce different products, or they would like to differentiate their products from their competitors because they would like to sell their products to the customers and win the competition. Okay, but there is no competitor here, it's only the government. So there is no point in differentiating the products. The other is, there is no point in advertising. Okay, because the demand is higher than the supply. So what is the point of advertising then? Okay, because advertising is to create demand, right? To initiate the customers to buy your products. But if you already have enough demand for your products, then you don't need to advertise your products, right? And the other is a pricing strategy. Price is determined by the state, and you pay whatever is demanded by the state for you to pay, right? Because you don't have any other alternatives. Okay. And the other, so which are, what are these countries categorized under centrally planned socialism are China, India, and the former USSR were categorized to be centrally planned socialist countries. Okay. But most of these countries are now moving toward some market allocation and private ownership. So as I've said, this is centrally planned socialism is a Marxist-Leninist assumption or theory. Okay, so there is no country in its fullest accepts this Marxist-Leninist theory, and it has already gone. There is no Marxist-Leninist system. Okay, so as I've said, China, even though we mostly refer to China as a communist country, China is moving toward this capitalism, or market capitalism, because China has taken the motivation and the courage to one of the province called Kwanyong. Okay, there is a province named like that, is fully practicing market capitalism, separate from other provinces in China. Okay, I think they are trying to see whether that market capitalism works in this province, and if it works very well, then they will expand to other provinces. Okay, so India is also, for example, India has chased out Coca-Cola in the early 19 I don't know 50s or 40s, but they invited Coca-Cola back now. Okay, so they are promoting international trade and also private ownership. Okay, so all of this, China, India, and Russia, or now the former USSR, are moving toward this market allocation and private ownership. Okay, so pretty much we can say there is no country which is following the centrally planned socialist economic system. Okay, and the other is centrally planned capitalism. So there are countries which are categorized under this. Okay, so economic system. This is an economic system in which common resource allocation is used extensively in an environment of private uh, uh, resource ownership. Okay, so resources are owned privately, but the resource allocation command will be is a command based, or it's a state owned. So, for example, if you take the Swedish government, it controls 2/3 of all the spending in the country. Okay, so for example, in Sweden, 45% of the telecom industry is owned by the government. The airlines, 21%. The banking, 20%, is owned by the government. Kind of market socialism. Okay, because if the government or the state controls the resources, then that is a socialist view, right? So but the Swedish government is planning to move towards privatization. Okay, so they are thinking of moving away from this socialist view and privatizing most of those government-owned resources. Okay, as I've said, more than 40% of the telecom is controlled by the government, and 20% of the airlines, 20% of the banking is owned by the government. Okay, and there is a high tax which is imposed on the people. Okay, and there is a high welfare. So it's sometimes the Swedish government is also sometimes called a welfare state. Okay, so anyways, you can say they partly exercise centrally planned capitalism. Okay, as we have already started with identifying some different criteria, there is no country that fits into just one of these economic systems. Okay, a country would be a little bit of market capitalism, little bit of centrally planned capitalism, little bit of market socialism, little bit of, okay? So there is no like clear boundary between these four economic systems, okay? So that's it. And let's talk about our third topic in this chapter, that is the stages of market development. So as we have said, there are different stages which are identified by the World Bank. Okay, so World Bank has identified about four categories of development using gross national income as a base. Okay, so I want you to identify or to differentiate gross national income, gross domestic product, and gross GNP. Okay, so GDP, gross domestic product, gross national income and let me check. Gross national product. Okay, so there is gross national product, gross national income, gross domestic product. That's GDP. Okay, GNI and GDP are two different things. Okay, so an economy of a country is evaluated based on GDP, gross domestic product. And gross domestic product is a summation of consumer consumption, capital investment, government spending, and net export. These four are added together to give gross domestic product. And this gross domestic product is used as a means to evaluate the economic condition of a country. Okay, but here you can also use gross national income. And gross national income is GDP plus income from abroad. Okay, so any cash flow from outside to our country added to the GDP is called GNI, or gross national income. Okay, and there is what we call gross national income per capita. So when we say per capita, it means that the gross national income, that is the GDP plus the income from outside the world divided by the number of population. So that is gross national income per capita. Okay, so in this case, the stages of market development are categorized. These four stages are categorized based on the gross national income per capita of a country. Okay, so it doesn't mean gross domestic product is bad, but sometimes economists use gross domestic product. They sometimes use gross national income. Okay, they even say that gross national income is a very good measure of the economic status of a country than gross domestic product. Okay, so here the stages of market development, these four stages of market development are categorized based on gross national income per capita. Okay, so these big emerging countries or emerging markets are identified 10 years ago. So these are countries in Central Europe. So BEM is big emerging markets. Okay, so these big emerging markets, they have identified 10 years ago countries in Central Europe, Latin America, Asia that were to have rapid economic growth. Okay, and of these 5 were identified as BRICS. Okay, from these 10 big emerging markets, 5 are identified as BRICS. So they are called Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So these are the 5 expected rapid growth economies in the world. Okay. So let's talk about economic freedom. So countries are ranked on different levels based on their economic freedom. So some countries are free. Okay. Some countries are called mostly free. Some countries are called mostly unfree, and some countries are called repressed countries in terms of the economic freedom in the country. So the economic freedom is identified based on these characteristics. So these are the variables that are used to identify an economic freedom as free, mostly unfree, or repressed. So how is the trade policy, for example? Is the trade policy highly controlled by the government? Okay. How is the taxation policy? Is high tax imposed on products? So is there a free trade agreement? Okay. How is the capital flow and foreign investment? How is the banking policy? Also, is the banking policy highly controlled by the state? Okay. So in some countries, the banking sector as all is controlled by the government. In some countries, the banking sector is given to the private sector. Okay, so wage and price controls. Does the government control the wages and prices of products? How is the property rights of people protected? How is the black market? Is it good or bad? Okay, so anyways, based on these variables, you can determine the economic freedom of a country. Okay, so I will just give you some example here. For example, Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, and Switzerland are identified as free in 2017 rankings. Okay, mostly free are this. So United States is not a free in economic freedom. Okay, because in the first place, United States is not a country that is fully exercising market economy or market capitalism. Okay, so anyways, mostly free are Estonia, Canada, United Arab Emirates, Ireland. Okay, but the free ones you can see are Hong Kong. So this means these variables are well addressed by these countries. Okay, then so let's see these different categories. Okay, low income countries, for example. So this is a category identified by World Bank. Okay, low income, middle income, high income, something like this. Okay, so which countries do we call a low income countries? So countries with gross national income per capita of 1,000 or less dollars is this is per year, okay, is called a low income country. Okay, so for example, if you go and check South Korea's gross national income per capita, you can see that it's about 38,000. Okay, so that is like advanced countries gross national income per capita. Okay, so if a country has a gross national per capita of 1,000 per year or less, then we call this country a low income country. Okay, or sometimes called least developed country, or LDC. Okay, so the characteristics of these low income countries are limited industrialization, high percentage of population in farming, high birth rates, low literacy rates, heavy reliance on foreign aid, political instability and unrest, and mostly these countries, low income countries, are concentrated or are found in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, sub-Saharan Africa. And the other category is called lower middle income countries. So these are countries which own or which have GNI per capita of greater than 1,000 and less than 4,000, something in this boundary. Okay, so the characteristics are they are rapidly expanding consumer market is there. There is a cheap motivated labor. There is a mature, standardized, labor-intensive industries there located, footwear, textiles, and toys, because of the number of populations also. So the 50 bottom-ranked countries are least developing countries, okay, or least developed or low income countries. So India is the only BRICS nation. So BRICS is identified as the emerging economies, right? But India is categorized under lower middle income countries, even though it is an emerging economy, okay? And also Uzbekistan or Tajikistan may be opportunities for economic growth. The other is upper middle income countries, okay? We have middle income, upper middle income countries. So upper middle income countries have GNI per capita of 4,000 to 12,000 something. Okay, so within that range, a country with that GNI per capita is called upper middle income country. Okay, so the characteristics are rapidly industrialization and less agricultural employment, increased urbanization, rising wages, high literacy rates, lower wage costs than advanced countries, and most of these BRICS, or about 4 of these BRICS or emerging markets, are categorized under the upper middle income countries. So Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa are upper middle income countries. Okay, and we have newly industrializing economies, and we have post-industrializing economies actually. Okay, so newly industrializing economies are lower, middle, and upper income country economies with the highest sustained rates of economic growth. Okay, so there are countries that are categorized. For example, these 3, Egypt, Indonesia, and the Philippines, are low income countries, but they are categorized under newly industrializing economies. Mexico and Turkey are upper middle income countries, but they are categorized under newly industrializing economies because they are flourishing and they have highly sustained rates of economic growth. Okay, so greater industrial outputs are there than developing economies, export of manufacturing and refined products, and they are called the next 11 or next N11, a newly country grouping identified by Goldman Sachs. So actually BRICS, this Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa was named by Goldman Sachs. Okay, and again it is the next 11, or N11 is the name that is given to the BRICS, plus this one identified as industrializing economies. Okay, so there are mistaken assumptions about BOP, or countries at the bottom of the pyramid, or low income countries. So there is all misconception. We will talk about this misconception after I will give you 10 minutes. Okay, after 10 minutes break I will be back.